Welcome back, everyone, to the Burnout Club. This is a place where we dissect burnout and success, one expert and experiment at a time. I'm your host, Patrice Bonfiglio, and today I'm joined by Hugh Massie. He is the executive chairman and founder of DNA Behavior International, and that is the Behavior and Money Insights Company. Hugh, welcome to the show. Thank you.
Great to be with you, Patrice, and to spend some time on this important topic.
Yes, I'm sure that you have seen plenty in your business venture of executives that have burnout, and I'm dying to really pick your brain and understand some of the insights that you've seen. So why don't we just start with who you are and tell us a little bit about DNA Behavior International?
So maybe one way of putting across who am I, other than my Australian accent. So while I live in Atlanta, I'm originally from Sydney, Australia. And that's got its own story, perhaps tied into all of this.
Oh, great.
However, I suppose who am I? I would say, or start with, that I'm a reformed accountant. So in my initial 10 years of my career, starting at age 20 and finishing at age 30, being mathematical about it, I was what Americans would call a CPA, working in one of the large accounting firms called Arthur Andersen, that no longer exists.
Mm-hmm.
And, I left there in 1996 to pursue more of an entrepreneurial life. But that's sort of the starting point. And I set out to build a business in financial services, dealing with high net worth families, executives, all around the idea of providing a hyper-personalized experience. And innately, that's what I had been doing when I was a CPA. I just didn't realize I was doing it. But I started to get more concrete about it when I set up the wealth management business. People deserve to have a tailor-made suit put on them and not just be given a one-size-fits-all financial plan or just sold products. And so I set about doing that. And it took me some years, probably about 5 years into it, to figure out really how to do that, other than just addressing people differently. It really came down to human behavior. And that started when one day somebody asked me the question, Hugh, you're not really happy. You don't sort of come across as being really happy with what you're doing. What are you passionate about? And I said, well, I want to help people all over the world become financially self-empowered. And in a way, I'd hit a wall, I think, personally, when I was in the chartered accounting CPA world, where I didn't love it anymore. I didn't want to be in the big firm environment. I looked at everybody above me and they didn't seem happy. I thought, do I want to, while I'm being offered the pathway to the next stage, effectively to be a partner, that wasn't sitting right for me. And while I wasn't what I would call at a burnout stage, I was coming up to that stage.
Oh, yeah.
I suppose if you say to your boss, when he says, well, how was your weekend? And you say, well, it was great till Sunday night and I threw up in the toilet thinking about coming in here.
There's a sign.
Right. I said it a couple of times. No one took any notice. But I was doing well in there. I liked a lot of the people. It wasn't anything about that. It was just, this wasn't fitting. And, and then I almost get to the stage in my own business 4 years into it when a friend asked me that question about what was I passionate about. And I think that that was the lever or the catalyst to the human behavior path, because I took about 6 months to figure out, if I'm going to put a tailor-made suit on people, I'm going to help them become financially self-empowered. That's not teaching them about how a stock market works or a bond or a savings plan. This is teaching them about themselves. So I connected the dots very quickly that how you help someone create wealth is connect them to their talents. They need to be doing things that they can optimize their talents, be aligned to that, and they need to understand the role of money in their life. how they make financial decisions. And this is all behavioral. So I figured that out. And then I had a chance meeting with a psychologist, and I asked her some questions. And I said, one of the things that I notice is that when people are under pressure or stress, their behavior changes. And so I get a person going from being a warm, cuddly teddy bear at a cocktail function to ringing me up and snapping. And what is that? And she said, well, that's natural hardwired behavior. It's set from very early in life, and all the dots connected for me. And I realized then that my journey, my purpose had to be in the human behavioral field, dealing with helping people with their behavior and wealth creation. And, today that's sort of known as behavioral economics. We didn't use those terms so much in 2001, but that's what it was. And from there, I've been on a path of fulfillment. I gave myself that license to do it. That's not saying every day's been easy or there hasn't been any stress or whatnot, because there's plenty of that. But that's the pathway to really Hugh becoming a reformed accountant, because I've gone from, providing tax advice, dealing with accounts and whatnot, to providing people with human behavioral insights off a technology platform that, me and my team have built. That's the switch. But that's the thing that's created fulfillment for me, in a way made me happier, and allowed, my life dreams to come about and to flourish. There's plenty, I suppose plenty of growth to go, plenty of stress to go as well.
Always,
But I think stress sometimes is what you make of it, I think. But if you're not in alignment with yourself, Patrice, I think that's when the stress becomes something that's short term, which is okay. That's an adrenaline boost, to something that's systemic that eats you up. That's a different thing.
Yes. And let's dive in. I think this is such a great lesson for the listeners. You knew or had figured out that your passion was something else, and there's not really a clear line between being an accountant or someone that's advising on financial matters to creating a data-driven firm. Can you talk about how you were able to make it happen? After you talked to that psychologist and recognize that it's behavior-driven, how could you really match everything up to start building the business?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is when I connected the dots, and I was there with Carol Pocklington, who was the person that helped me connect the dots, I suppose, by giving me more of a scientific explanation as to what I was trying to do. I suppose a few reflections came. I sat on the floor in my bedroom one day, and I can remember doing it. It was somewhat meditating, but probably didn't do it as well then as I might do it now. But I reflected, and I went back to my boyhood dreams, where I knew from very early on that I wanted to have a business that was global.
Oh,
and I knew that it could not be something that was directly wealth management, right? From where I was, running what was a successful little business in Sydney. That wasn't going to happen that way. But I could build something that has global impact through technology. So I could see that.
Yeah.
I could also see that how that could be a platform to deliver a consistent service globally. I sort of saw how Arthur Andersen had worked, with large offices around, but it was a very consistent culture if you stepped in from one practice to the other, because I had the opportunity to do that, working in a number of the offices around the world. It was a very consistent culture that they had created.
Right.
And so I thought, okay, I can do this through technology. And so I then said to Carol, well, you need to help me build a system. And that's when she said, you need to meet these guys in America, in Atlanta specifically, and they'll help you do this. And so I got on an airplane the next week, and there were 40 flights in 4 years, and we built the algorithms, systems, methodologies to do it. And then I made a decision to stay and live in America. But that's how a lot of that came about. But I suppose in the way I think and operate, I am about business models and how do you build the right business model, to be scalable. How can you multiply yourself, if you want to call it that?
Yes.
And technology is the vehicle, and the more and more that technology has grown, developed, now we've got AI, Gen AI, and machine learning and things. That's allowed this to go to a whole new level that I think I was dreaming back then and thinking
Right.
back then in 2001 when I started, that technology would one day become my friend. And it has, in the last 2 years, really allowed us to, if you want to call it, proliferate ourselves.
Yes. And I think that's a conversation that many people are having with AI and Gen AI. When is the right time to adopt, and how fully do you adopt it? It almost seems like you were primed and ready to adopt. Can you talk a little bit about that transition with the technology?
Yeah, I think that you can't just go and build AI out of nothing. And people have asked us, well, how did you get there so quickly? Well, you've got to remember we've been building a business that was technology driven already for 20 plus years. And in some ways, a lot of that is AI, just not as advanced as what, if you want to call it open AI and Gen AI allow you to do. But we were headed down that path. There's we've launched what we call the digital scan tool. So rather than people having to complete our online assessment, it can now be done digitally.
Really?
But we started thinking about that back in 2017. So when the moment came, all the research was there. Essentially, a prototype was there. When you come to saying, okay, I want to have AI interpret the profile reports that we have instead of a coach or a consultant having to do it, and this is not obviating the role of the coach or consultant, it's elevating their role. But even for them, they can get our reporting read for them with the AI, or if they say, okay, person is of Y style, how would I, create a coaching script or a conflict communication script or whatever? Well, we already had 20,000 pages of documents.
Wow.
That could be loaded into AI to do it. And in fact, the building of the AI took us under 1 week in that sense, because we have already, but I had spent intuitively, I knew something was going to come in our way. And I had spent with our team 6 months organizing all of our filing systems, and we were already organized.
Yeah.
That's what's enabled us to do it. But then the other thing is what people don't realize is, okay, what's your business model that sits around it? And how does that get changed? And because if you're a very coaching, training, consultant-centric business, you want to keep, and you're relying on billable hours and whatnot, you're going to be more concerned about what AI does and where it sits,
Right.
as opposed to we were more technology-driven, scale-driven. From quite some years, from 10 years ago, we made that move away from being a training company because it wasn't scalable enough and it wasn't profitable enough. It needed to be tech-driven. So I think, though, if you have the wrong model, it's hard to undo it when this disruption, if you want to call it, comes up.
Sure.
But even with us, with selling psychometric assessments at a high price relatively, that people have to complete, not the highest price in the market, but relatively, to then have a digital product that doesn't require personal participation, that's game changing in a lot of ways, because as we've mapped out for one of our firms, they've done 3,000 profiles with us over the last 5 to 8 years, but they've got 440,000 people being, clients, client families, employees, leads, whatever in their ecosystem. Well, we can digitally scan all of them for them and give them that information so that they can create personalized experiences for all 440,000 people. Bang. That's a huge difference. That is a huge difference in business model, right? Yep. Scalability, everything. What my team does or doesn't do, it's a big change.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you give just more insight? So maybe, example company and how they would use it. Let's talk about let's say a new company, because the one you just spoke about, you've been working with them for 8 years. They already have all of those profiles built out.
Yeah. So how does it start?
Yeah.
This is the ideal world. It doesn't always quite start this way, but we're all about, at DNA Behavior, about building the right people-centric culture. And so the belief system behind that is it starts off with the leadership at the top level, and it really starts with the CEO.
Yep.
And he or she is going to influence what happens all the way down. Their presence is felt because in the decisions they make, the way they behave, because they appoint the C-suite that's around them. They manage the C-suite, and then they're the top line executives that manage the varying teams that are in the business. And it doesn't really matter what size of the business it is. That is the truth all the way down. Yeah. So in the ideal world, if the CEO is not prepared to participate in the DNA discovery process, have the feedback, embrace it, and then step up and say, and have the courage to say, this is who I am, this is my strength and struggles, and this is potentially, these are the areas where I'm going to buckle down more in terms of my strengths, and this is the areas where I need to be careful because of my struggles, and this is how I built the team to deal with it. That's how we address it. If they're not prepared to do that, really any major initiative that we would adopt would fail.
Yep.
Yes, we could work with a lower down divisional team and do ABCD and have a fun team building session, etc. But what we're really talking about is the culture end to end, the decision making end to end, and every person in the ecosystem of that company. And we know where we're a specialist is how do employees or advisors deal with their clients. Everyone talks about employee engagement. If that's not strong, nothing happens. It's actually about the clients at the end of the day. And of course, you've got to have strong employee engagement and right culture.
Right.
But, if the employees are all happy, but the clients aren't, there's a problem.
Yes, definitely.
And that happens. That happens.
Yeah. When you are going through that initial phase with the CEO, are there particular behavior traits, and tell me if I'm using the wrong terminology here, but
yeah, you're using the right terms. Yep.
Okay. Behavioral traits that will lend itself to burnout, either for themselves or for the employee base?
Yeah, there are. I think that the traits that will lead to, one that could just outright lead to a burnout is, so there's a few points, Patrice, to make with this. One would lead to a burnout is if you are what we call a pioneering person. So you're extremely goal-driven, very competitive, very determined at following through on goals. And you're not prepared to adapt, perhaps. Okay. You're a complete bulldog as far as goals are concerned. While that might help business growth, the risk is that you sacrifice a quality of life, burnout, etc. Now, burnout, though, and stress can come from then also if you are working in a role that you're not suited to. Let's say that in our language at DNA, if you're an engager type person, very warm, friendly, outgoing, usually they're spontaneous, flexible, intuitive type people. If you're doing the accounting work and detailed tasks, doesn't mean not saying you couldn't deal with that stuff, but if you've got to do that day in, day out, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
If you are that same type of person put into a sales role,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not competitive enough. And really, meeting with people is more of a fun thing, and, showing your charm and whatnot, that's going to become stressful very quickly too. So it's about alignment of your talent to the role. If that's not right,
Mm-hmm.
the next problem, that's a stress problem. That causes stress. That's why I'm very big on alignment. And everybody's
Right.
got a place in the world where they
Mm-hmm.
can use their natural talents, which is what we measure,
Mm-hmm.
put that with their passion. They can do really well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it may not always be in the job you're in either. But if you know what that is, you can either be working towards that's going to become your life later on, or,
Mm-hmm.
as I said to somebody a number of years ago, your passion's with music, but you've got to do that. You also love doing these training roles. You don't have to cut out the music.
Mm-hmm.
What I got her to see was, why don't you bring the music to your training programs?
Mm-hmm.
And she never did a training program again without there being a piano nearby. And
Oh, interesting.
that solved a whole problem, and that made an experience that made the training more valuable. So there's a lot of ways to solve these problems. The other one I think that causes stress is, let's say everybody is working in the right roles, right? And they're working in their passions. If you've got leadership that is not providing a psychologically safe working environment, all bets are off as far as it being happy, it being fun, there being celebrations, and people being able to say what they need to say. If you need to confront the boss to say, I don't think that's a really good idea. I know where you're coming from, but not a great idea based on this research. If you can't say that, there's a lot of problems. You see that? And then you're suppressing what people say. You're saying, well, just, the boss just says, well, just listen to me, and I'm the source of all wisdom, and you sit in the corner and get that stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
It's not great. And I know that firsthand from the first job I had, right? That I lasted 10 years in, because that part got worse and worse, right?
Yeah.
And, I think that's why the leaders at the end of the day need to be on board with this, right?
Do you find that if the leader does not create a culture of psychological safety, that they can actually change, or is it really pretty kind of structured? If they have not created it, it's because they really aren't into the idea of actually valuing psychological safety.
Yeah, it's more the latter. So
Okay.
let's say that you take a classic case of this is Boeing. And Boeing, once upon a time, built the best aircraft, safety first culture. It's taken over by, there's a merger with McDonnell Douglas, even though Boeing's bigger. But the McDonnell Douglas people, who are more numbers, results focused, get to ousting the Boeing people. They're at the top of the pile, and all they're doing is driving it hard as far as results. And then you're crushing people that bring up safety concerns around the 737 MAX and whatnot. And Boeing's got a million issues now. And that's the problem. So that if the leadership is not prepared, in a sense, to listen to the people, to the historical culture of what made the company great, and it is only about the bottom line, then it's a problem. Now, if I've been vulnerable with this, I would be of a behavioral style, someone that's very and probably was in the earlier part of my career, very capable of, okay, it's about billable hours, being extremely efficient. It's my work first. All of that, all of the tactics. Now, perhaps I could sit here and say, if I hung out at Arthur Andersen the next number of years, I'd be doing that too, right? To some degree, the environment might have forced me to it, but I've got that what I call results-driven nature. But I learned, particularly once I was the entrepreneurial boss, I learned that pretty early on, if I behaved that way, I wasn't going to keep the people. And even my first management experience at Arthur Andersen sort of taught me that once.
Mm-hmm.
I got one hard lesson there. I didn't get promoted when I thought I would, and I was on the fast track. One lesson that caused some changes
Mm-hmm.
that led me to being even better in there,
Right.
but and in a way not accepting a lack of psychological safety. But
Mm-hmm.
in my own business, I knew I have to, got to do my best to be a good leader. Now, you have got your temperament to deal with. I'm very hardwired to a certain direction, but that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean I have to fly off the handle at my team or be henpecking them,
Right.
micromanaging, whatever. And also, I brought in the right people around me to help me manage all of that, right?
Mm.
But
That's a good
you've
point.
got to have the belief that it's important, and then you're going to do everything to protect it. That doesn't mean there isn't the odd day where you've got to make a difficult decision. That's not about psychological safety.
Right.
It's about how you handle yourself and
Mm-hmm.
allowing a team to flourish, allowing them to speak up and do things. And that's a
Did,
belief system. And it doesn't matter how you're wired, you can decide to create that.
I love that. Did you have to establish particular habits to be able to make those decisions or to avoid burnout?
Yes, I think that what I started to learn is when you feel a lot of these things through your body,
Mm-hmm.
when it doesn't feel right, situations don't feel right, that's certainly when you've got to make a change. And there's times like I would call a fairly determined, hardworking person,
Mm-hmm.
and I can go at it like a bull in a china shop for probably 3 weeks,
Yeah.
which means there's some work on the weekend and whatnot, and high intensity thinking, however you want to put it.
Mm-hmm.
But I know then I've got to release the valves a bit and go and do other things. Even these days now, I've sort of learned that I've got. I suppose it's sort of like the tiny habits concept of,
Mm-hmm.
if you can make some small changes, then you can lead to big changes.
Right.
I decided 6-7 years ago to change my calendar that there were X mornings in the week where I would not be available for meetings, and I was going to do exercise, play
Mm-hmm.
tennis or whatever, flexibility work, balance work, so that I would be healthier. And that then leads to a whole lot of other changes because then you can see your performance changing. And
Mm.
and it's not that I probably work a little bit less hours, but the effectiveness, the happiness with it is higher, and I don't feel like, life passes me by. So that's how
Mm-hmm.
I've managed it. But I think that the key thing, Patrice, is you've got to find things that you enjoy doing
Mm-hmm.
and specifically make time for it.
Yes.
And it's not a negotiable then.
Right. And
I
I
mean,
see what you're
obviously, it's a
saying.
negotiable if your wife is sick or you've got a sick child or an emergency.
Yes.
But as a general, what I call 9 out of 10 days sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing,
Yeah.
you
But
build
there's
it in.
value. Yeah, there's
Yep.
value in not having the resentment that builds up if you keep pushing that aside. Definitely.
And I think that the stress on the other side of all that can come from being inflexible with those
Mm-hmm.
things too.
Mm-hmm.
That causes another problem. So it's at the end of the day, I suppose life is a balancing act.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some things I think you just got to build in to manage the stress. And I think that then gives you, I find that when I'm exercising, if I'm sitting on my Peloton bike, even if I'm hammering away at it
Mm-hmm.
at high intensity, it's giving me time to process a thought. Okay, I've hit a
Yeah.
wall on solving a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I give myself the hour on the bike or 45 minutes or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
problem solved. Or I take my dogs for a walk. It's allowing yourself to do all those things.
Yes. Yeah. I'm slowly seeing the value in it, and taking the dog for a walk. I would have never done that 3 years ago, but on a walk, had a problem was solved in my mind before I got back to the house. It was
And
it was very reassuring.
this is maybe everybody's different. And I realized last Christmas, I can remember we were just coming back from a family trip from Germany in Munich, coming back to Atlanta, and I was standing outside waiting for the car to come, and I was thinking, this has been a great couple of weeks away because I've had a lot of time to reflect. And really, at the end of the day, reflection is my superpower. And I went and looked at my little document that I have on my talents and purpose and how everything fits together for Hugh around my identity. Yep, there it is. Point number 5 is reflection, is a strength for me. And I realized I'm doing all these things that are reflective. If you include meditation, quiet times, those things are there. And I think that part of my strength with it is because there's so many thoughts running through my head, and I'm not the only one, because there's 60,000 thoughts running in your head every minute, right? But some of them more important than others is I write them down, right? Obviously not 60,000 things, but I key things. I have a little notepad that's always with me. I have one in the car, got one on my table, one in my briefcase, one in my jacket pocket if I'm going out. They're everywhere to write notes, because if I write that point down, it's remembered, and whatever it is gets actioned in some way. The writing down of it relieves the stress. If I have to think, gee, I just had a monumental idea, that's what I've been thinking of for the last week. Suddenly it's clicked, and you can't write it down, and then you forget it.
Yeah. I keep a small notebook by my bedside in case I think of something in the middle of the night. I can't actually go back to sleep until I write it down.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I try to get myself now to a place where all the thinking's done before I get to bed. But thoughts are being, and this is one of the things, is that your brain is working while you're asleep. That's why I use the term money never sleeps. It's part of the whole energy of money theorem that we have, that your thoughts about money are, not only is money earning more money in the bank or in an investment, and maybe sometimes losing too, but it's running through your mind. And the thoughts you go to bed with, right? If you've got stressful thoughts that you go to bed with, you're going to wake up with them, and you're probably going to bring them to life.
You bring up a whole
probably another
concept.
whole area.
Well, yeah. I mean, and maybe we could go down the road a little bit, but sometimes I have to remember, since my industry, we deal with money day in and day out, but I think financial burnout, just the concepts of finance and money are very stressful for most people. Can you just talk a little bit about why conversations around money are so difficult from that behavioral standpoint, and how people can maybe change that?
Yeah, I think that, just sort of to sew into that a little bit, Patrice, money is the biggest cause of stress. There's plenty of research, external research on that. So it's not Hugh Massie, even though 25 years ago I was saying exactly that. And I think it's important at this point, before I delve into solving the problem, that stress is what accelerates aging. And that's why, in this day and age, it's so important to address the stress. And so therefore, money, stress, aging. And I think if we all remember that, if you want to live a quality of life for longer, you need to solve the stress point. And that can come up for any reason. It could be your stress is around money, is how you're conversing with your wife about it, or spouse, business partner, could be with a child. You've got a lot of money. What do I do for my grandkids? And it can be that you don't have enough money. But, so that's a different issue as far as happiness is concerned. But they're all there together. The issue with money, one of the big issues with money, is that people compare themselves to others. So therefore, if you ask somebody, well, what defines success? And I've seen and experienced a conversation with people saying, well, the scorecard is how much you got in the bank. And that, in my mind, is putting yourself on a path to misery. Yes, you might have all the financial flexibility in the world. And you might have worked really hard to get to that place. But if that's your defining point, it's not very good, because let's say that you get divorced. right? And that happens to people, half of it's gone. Or you're sitting there saying, yep, that's my defines me, and I'm not going to spend any money, even if I've got $50 million, because what I've got's important. It's part of my identity. If money becomes your identity, that's the problem. And the issue is there's always somebody with more,
right,
or the perception of more, but you don't know what's going on in the rest of their life. You don't know what's going on in their health. So I think that what I try to do is get people to measure their success in terms of their impact. What's your impact in some area? And, for me, it's, how many lives am I positively impacting in a particular year? That's how I tend to get others to think about it. Be like you, Patrice, with your podcasts. How many people, listeners, are there going to be in a year? And then you multiply that up over a period of time. There's going to be millions, right?
Yeah.
And you build your business backwards from that, right? But it's not just all about how much did you make, but you can say, okay, I'm doing this and I'm impacting humanity positively. Well, that's already now adding meaning. And now I think taking away a lot of stress. And therefore, when we start to talk about money, really the conversation about money is not about money. It's about your purpose and what are you doing of meaning. And I think that, if you take a husband and wife and start getting them, if you sit them down as a financial advisor and say, well, what does money mean to you? If that comes out as the cold question, you're going to get all sorts of answers. There's going to be historical stuff, baggage, fighting with each other about, well, you did this and did that. Whereas if it comes down to, let's talk about your purpose and then how is it going to be funded, then we can get to a sensible conversation. And after that, we might need to address the fact that, okay, somebody had a troubled childhood or saw a consistent pattern of these things going on. And then you say, okay, well, you build that into the plan to manage that, right?
Right.
But it's got to start out with, it's got to be a purpose-based conversation and an identity, and over that, an identity-based conversation in how you want to be seen in the world and how do you want to be held accountable. When you get that clear, so really being clear about yourself, the money part's easier to handle. But if your identity is wrapped up in boats, cars, a big house, wife wearing mink coats and whatnot, if you're a guy, if you're the female, different, this is the same on both sides. If your life's wrapped up in that, you're toast. There's always someone better, got more. And what happens when it goes?
Right. I love that you added in something, because I hear lots of people maybe declare their purpose and say they want to have an impact, and maybe they even identified some areas where they can add impact. But your question about how do you want to be held accountable, I think that's a great question and something that we should all probably mill over a little bit.
Yeah, because it's easy to put words to it.
Right. Yeah. That actually requires action and thinking through the whole plan. And this may not be a natural segue, but is that part of how you got involved with Boys Without Fathers?
In part. So I think that when I was, if I go back, I suppose you'd sort of talk about this in stories. At about the time I started the DNA behavior business, a relative of mine was over at my house, in Sydney, and he said, and I'd had a cocktail party and I had a whole lot of friends in there, and this guy Roger was a bit older than some of my friends, but I had some of the other relatives there, second cousins and whatnot, and he's he said your dad would be really proud of you, because he could see a picture of him in my study, and in fact it's behind me here now, because my father had died when I was 1, and of course so. In a way, my second cousin had got to see some of me as an adult,
right.
And what I was out there doing. And my brother is, highly accomplished pediatric respiratory specialist in Australia. And, but I knew, and one of the things I said to myself is I need to help other youths
Mm-hmm.
live a better life and be a mentor for them. Because I didn't have a dad. I had a great stepfather who came to my life at sort of 16, 17.
Mm-hmm.
I was at boarding school. When I left boarding school, he gave me a helping hand on varying things that would never have happened.
Right.
And that's was always in my mind. And when I set up DNA behavior, I realized, okay, I'm helping people with talent development, understanding themselves, where they could go in a career, all these types of things. I need at some point, when I've got the time, to do something with youth development. And I always dabbled in it.
Right. Yeah.
The time was never right, but one day about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, probably 4 years ago now, I did podcasts like this with 6 of our clients. And I was doing identity conversations with our clients.
Oh, great.
And there were 6 males, 6 in a row. And guess what? All of them didn't have a father.
Really?
And the stories were strikingly similar, and one of them had done a PhD in this work. And so he said, Hugh, these are the 6 issues, if you want to call it that, or the fallouts from the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And the earlier your father leaves your life permanently, but even if it's, just the home, it's still in a way without a father to some degree, if the father's very distant.
Right.
Then these 6 things show up.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're around literacy, obesity, social confidence, aggression. And I was lucky my mother was able to, help with some of it, harness some of it. Going to an all-boys boarding school probably was helpful. And I think she recognized, and although she had gone to boarding school and my father had, she recognized that she needed to do that, even if she wasn't going to have her 2 kids at home for our development. I maintained with her that, okay, not everything was great about being there. There were some good things, but not everything was great, but you made the right decision on that basis. But that's what led to, once I realized, okay, I had these challenges. Other kids have had it far worse than me or reacted far worse, but there's something to be done with this. And that's really what started me on the journey of Boys Without Fathers. And now, step by step, we're helping others in varying programs. So some of it happens through the DNA business. The guy that tennis pro that's taught me tennis for the last 7 years. He's from Ghana, and he's a boy without a father, and now I help him with the foundation he has, where there's 2,500 kids who are kids without a parent, learning tennis in Ghana as a way for them to overcome learning difficulties, get socialization, build community, confidence, because sports can help with that. So I've got this sort of going in areas. I think that as my life goes into its next chapter, that this will be where I spend all my time.
That's beautiful.
But I've got a little way to go before I hang up my boots on DNA. But I'll never stop that either. I think this work is. But I think that what the important thing is that you can bring this kind of passion and work and interest into your business. What doesn't matter what business you've got.
Right.
If you're prepared to open yourself up to it, and it brings more community to the overall business. It helps with the employee engagement. Brings other people closer to your brand. And so I encourage, again, people in terms of human impact, that having social impact doesn't have to be just a check writing experience. It can be, there's some of that. It's a complete growth experience.
Yeah. No, you're so right. Just hearing you talk about your story and how you've committed to helping kids in your situation. My father died when I was 10, so I maybe as a girl, it's slightly different.
There's different issues for a girl,
yeah,
and the research will come out with different conclusions, and I can't speak to that because I'm not you, Patrice, in that situation, and I didn't have a sister. If I had a sister, there would be consequences there for her. I had a younger brother. But the work to deal with girls without a dad is equally as important. I think the issue that we recognize for boys is that if the trauma is not dealt with or start to get dealt with early enough in their lives, there tends to be a lot of aggression.
Yeah.
And that's where then you see kids going to jail, doing horrible things. And that's, that's why, some of this work is needed, but even it's needed it's needed all the way through.
Right.
If a kid's going to do something really bad, it's probably going to start early, and because you get in with the wrong crowd. The issue is, and this is what my relative said, is no boundaries were set for you, right? In a way in which a male would set them. My mother was no pushover. She was strict, but it's not the same boundaries, right?
Right.
And the boundaries aren't just a father walking around with a cane or with a belt. That's
yeah.
it's something about the present.
I love that you really took your best traits and what you were interested in and began to weave it through the lives of others and kind of go earlier and earlier. I'm going to reflect on that a little bit. Just it's an interesting angle to think about and explore. Hopefully the listeners do too.
Yeah. It's for all of us in a way, and part of my message would be is to face up to who you are and what those traits are and where they came from, right? This is the ultimate thing in self-awareness, because once you do, you can own any changes that are necessary, and it's part of learning to love yourself. And I think if you don't get to that place, then it's hard to love someone else. And my sort of message which comes through the Boys Without Fathers, but I think it's throughout all of this, is don't be the victim, be the victor. Okay, you couldn't help that your dad died when you were 10, but look at all the great things you're out there doing now, right?
Right.
And my dad, he died when I was 1, but I could play victim to that and say, well, poor me, and make it an excuse. No, it's set up. I'd always want to have a father, but it's set me up in a way to go and do what I'm doing, and in a way I've honoring him by doing it.
I've never heard that phrase before. I don't know if you coined it or if it's widely known, but don't be a victim, be a victor. I like that.
Well, I was doing a Boys Without Fathers presentation last year, and I was sort of thinking, okay, what's the message in here? And as I was going through it, and I was looking at a number of angles, because there's biblical angles with this, there's philosophical angles, and as I distilled it all down, that was the summary point. So I thought, okay, I'm going to keep that.
Yeah, that works. I mean, that's something people get like that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. You've covered so much, and with behavioral traits, we could probably talk for hours and hours on end. And you've done a great job distilling everything down. Is there anything that you want to leave with the listeners?
Well, I think that, Patrice, because we're talking about burnout, I think that just remember, while we talk a lot of these days about sugar being the next tobacco, so I don't need to go to the next stage on that, but I think stress is the other thing that we all owe it to ourselves to deal with. It needs to be managed. Stress doesn't mean no work. It's doing things that are in alignment with who you are. That would be, the big message. If you're an entrepreneur, have your big dream, start small and finish big. And just understand there's going to be blockages along the way. Wait your time, unblock them, be patient. Things are going to come, and don't measure yourself against other people. Just play your own game. That's what's going to help you. And I think, and then how you do that, then really how you play your own game really comes to understanding what your own talents are. I've got my set. And, I've got to work to those strengths, but also understand that there are consequences in terms of struggles with it. So you work in those boundaries. And when you know those for yourself, then you can have a operating plan for yourself, be very successful in an overall impact sense. And hopefully that comes with that financially and life happiness. That would be the message. And again, as we said before, don't be the victim, be the victor, and go and work out how you can be the victor. Because everybody's got a circumstance they came from.
So
Everyone
true.
has.
It's hard to beat that line.
Yeah.
I love it. I think we should wrap on that.
All right.
So all the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe. And Hugh, thank you so much for being on the show.
That's a pleasure, Patrice. I really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. Until next time, thank you, everyone. Bye.